Hello, friends. In this episode, I'm speaking to Mark Fisher, and we're talking about why you should be billing by the week instead of billing by the month. So, if you're still charging your clients for services based on a monthly charge instead of a weekly charge, I think you should listen to this podcast and consider making the switch. Let's dive in. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. And today I'm here with Mr. Fisher. Hello, Mr. Fisher.
Hello, Mr. Keeler.
What a pleasure. Before we dive into our today's conversation, I just want to take a quick moment to give your YouTube channel a shout out. You're doing amazing video content on there, covering a wide range of topics I think our listeners really would find valuable. And you're really putting it all out there. It's very transparent about how you run MFF. So, dear listeners, please go watch Mark's YouTube. And we're creating content lots of other places. Where else should they go, Fisher?
Yeah, we have now, as by the time you're listening to this, have launched a new initiative where we'll be having a lot more vertical video content all over the land, which is something that I think another micro takeaway for you is all the algorithms right now are prioritizing vertical video. So if you want to follow Business for Unicorns on TikTok, you can follow Business for Unicorns on Instagram. I'm even considering myself maybe doing some more postings. So I guess you'll see by the time we get there. But if you want more bite-sized, fast snack video versions of a lot of the content we have all over the land, following us on Instagram is awesome. And yes, if you would follow me on the YouTube channel, it would bring me great happiness. I've been working very, very hard on it. You can go to markfisheryoutube.com and it'll bring you right there. We have just, as of this recording, recently organized things into playlists. It is becoming quite the library, and selfishly, I like it because now when people ask me questions more often than not, I can just send them a link.
I already said that. I've already said this on YouTube.
Send them a link. Yeah. Here you go. Watch this.
Amazing. Well, let's dive into today's conversation. And we want to talk a little bit about this phenomenon that really, I'll speak for myself, has been on my radar for maybe the last year and a half or so. We've really been talking about this a lot with Unicorn Society members, maybe 2 years. What is time these days? But it's this idea that, for the longest time in the fitness industry, everyone was billing monthly. That, you've got a big box gym membership or belong to a place like Mark Fisher Fitness. For the longest time, we billed people 12 times per year based on the month. And over the last few years, there's been this kind of growing movement to move towards weekly billing. And we wanted to talk about it today because I think it's something that if it's not on your radar yet, it needs to be on your damn radar. And we'll talk you through kind of why it matters and what it will look like possibly to transition to that if you're not already. Fisher, do you want to dive in and just talk a little bit about the math and why this is valuable from a big picture perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is I'm particularly excited we're talking about this because based on our pre-conversation chat, I thought we were going to have another topic, but this is also something I'm very excited to talk about. So let's talk about this one. Yeah, this is, I think, a very important pro move that I don't really see a downside to. So this is something we've become very passionate about, the Unicorn Society. I think something we'll talk about that is also of interest, and Keeler and I have slightly different thinking around exactly how to implement it. But the highest level, understand if you're doing 12 payments per year, that's 12 payments. More often than not, you can do 13 payments per year for around the same price, or essentially 52 weeks, depending again on how you frame this up and how you bill. And it essentially will give you an extra payment per year. And there's a lot, I think, to like about this. I think number one, no matter how you choose the position, how you choose the bill, you are effectively making the number feel a little bit smaller. Now, again, savvy consumers are going to understand if you're referring to a weekly price, a month is more than 4 weeks. But from a psychological perspective, if you're presenting the weekly rate, they're still going to anchor towards the smaller rate. It's going to make it feel a little bit more bite-sized. So I don't really see a downside to doing this. And I think also it solves some other issues, but I'll pull up there here. What else do you think is important to?
I was just going to say, I think just giving the flat out math that if you're, let's just say, for example, that you give people 8 visits per month. Right. And when you're billing monthly, you're kind of assuming that every month is the same length. They have to use those 8 visits the same, if you assume that that's like twice a week, right? We usually call something like 8 visits a month kind of twice a week, but it's really not because there's months that are shorter and longer. And in those longer months, you are paying your team to deliver services for which, in some cases, you haven't generated all the revenue for, right? Like, right. Because there's like extra long. So there's a whole extra month in the year that we're not billing for that we can be. So instead of pretending like every month is the same 4-week cycle, which it's not, and only billing basically based on a 48-week year, we want to base on a full 52-week year, which means, as Mark said, you get a whole extra month of billing, a whole extra kind of 4-week cycle of billing, so it's just such a no-brainer. I think when we do the math, tell me if this is right, Fisher, I think it automatically gives you about 8% more revenue on the year by having one extra billing cycle. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's correct. And certainly something I'll put a pin in that we should address a little bit is how you roll this out, right? Because your clients are not idiots, right? And if you say like,
it's a rate increase,
they're going to do the math, right? And I think that's okay. But I think this will be the easiest to swallow rate increase that you're ever going to do. This is actually making me now think perhaps there's maybe some verbiage I should add in the Raise Your Rates template, which is available if you email me, mark@businessforunicorns.com. But first go to my YouTube channel, subscribe, and then check out how to raise your rates. Because when you raise your rates, even though, again, they're going to do the math and know it's bigger, it's going to feel smaller if now you're quoting, depending on how you want to roll it out, the weekly or the, bi-fortnightly rate. Now, I will also note that this also solves a very annoying issue that virtually all of us have, unless you're on an unlimited plan, which, by the way, I generally don't ever like, and maybe we'll talk about that. But if you're selling, let's say 4 sessions per month or 8 sessions per month, you're always dealing with the 5th Monday. I cannot tell you what a constant pain point this was at MFF for us for years, because people have their 8 sessions, their 4 sessions, but of course they're signing up every single week. So then they constantly have this somewhat annoying missed expectation where not only do you have the administrative headache of asking them, well, do you want to have this extra section? Do you want us to bill you? Sometimes they're getting annoyed because now they feel like they're having to pay more money for this thing that, again, technically we never promised, but I can understand they're thinking on a weekly basis when they're thinking about their fitness. And I think to some extent that is part of what makes this something that does require some nuance to navigate, right? Because people do tend to think about buying things on a monthly basis rather than weekly, but they think about doing their fitness on a weekly basis rather than monthly. So to some extent, I think this lines up a little bit. We want to help
them with that, right? Like we want them to build in that consistency. If I come once a week, I come twice a week, I come 4 times a week. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We don't want to do like, oh, actually, I'm going to need you to skip this next Monday because you don't have a credit. Or again, listen, it didn't not work. A lot of people did buy the extra session. You could say like, okay, well, over the course of the year, it's a consistent upsell opportunity that arguably we've lost, but wow, I just rather have everybody have no choice but to do the extra thing rather than having to have a conversation or send out an email. So it's actually saved us a lot of time administratively, which is one of the things that I like about it, not just for us, but also truly for your clients.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, again, the folks who are listening who this applies less to is if you're doing an unlimited thing, there's not a whole lot of extra value here. But if you're charging per session, either like with a flat number like we usually did, like 4 times a month, 8 times a month, or you're doing bi-week, 2 times a week, 3 times a week, this is really valuable. This is like, money you're leaving on the table and consistency that you can build into your clients' habits that is valuable to you and them. Right. And so I think there's so much to gain from it. Let's talk a little bit about how one would make this transition. And certainly, again, shout out to our Raise Your Rates template you can get by emailing us or checking out Mark's YouTube. But Fisher, walk through how you think about, again, this is like a Raise Your Rates, but it's a little different because you're explaining also how they're getting billed. So maybe just kind of walk through how it happened at MFF.
Yep. So, at MFF, I think interesting enough, it was maybe a little atypical because it was coming back after the world ended.
Oh, this was pandemic.
Oh, yeah. So there was so much disruption. And, I think one thing that's interesting here to consider that's a potential takeaway, at least to glean our particular strategy for this, is the longer we've been in the game, the more we've come around to cut once, cut deep. If we're going to make a big change, even though it's a huge administrative headache, rather than have your clients deal with death by 1,000 cuts, we're just going to cut once. So when we opened back up, we made a lot of changes, some of which actually we reverted back to, like our not particularly successful stab at 45-minute classes, which, by the way, I think in general, if I had to do it all over again, I might do that. I just think our culture, which is both the staff and the ninjas, we're too committed to needing the full 60 minutes. As a fitness professional, I don't think that's actually strictly necessary for a metabolic resistance training class, but I'll leave that aside. Sometimes another takeaway is sometimes you lose. Sometimes they all win. You have to work with what you want, and then maybe have other businesses you do that where you won't have quite the drag and resistance. So as far as the rollout for that, we were just honest with people. And just like anytime you're going to do a price increase, we were clear about, look, here's the benefit to you. Here's part of why this is actually going to be in your best interest. And we also didn't lie and didn't pretend that it was not a rate increase. We were transparent that this is going to represent a price increase. It's been a long time we've done it. Now, I think as it happened, this particular price increase was not falling into the category of what I define as a correction. So when I'm talking about raising rates, I make a distinction between there's price increases and there's a price correction. If you're 8, 10% plus, 15%, 30%, you're in a price correction. That's a different conversation because that's going to leave a different type of sting. If you're below, certainly 5% or below, I'm not saying people won't complain, but if you position to them on the per session or per class rate, oftentimes we're looking at like $1, $2 per session. People are not really going to, they're not going to have a big deal. So I think there's some nuance there. And I think it's important to market the ways you're making the business better. You can acknowledge that, yep, cost of living goes up every year for everything, including all of your vendors. But I wouldn't spend too much time focusing on your expenses. I'd focus more on the benefit to them and the things you're doing well. And I also just wouldn't make it that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. So
yeah, Fisher, let's pause there for a second. Can we maybe give a few examples of the kinds of things we put in emails that are, ways in which our clients benefit from us having a really kind of competitive rate, by keeping our rates where they should be. How do clients benefit? How do you explain that in an email? What are some examples?
Yeah, I think the simplest things are the ones that are probably obvious, which are we're continuing to upgrade our space. We continue to upgrade and improve our equipment. We invest in our team. Mm-hmm. We take great care of our team and give them a real benefit-rich place to work. And I think the thing about that, again, that is tricky in your nuance is it always really has to be about them. I don't think it's strictly wrong to make a reference to inflation or make a reference to your costs, but for the most part, they don't really care. And for the most part, they know what's going on. So I wouldn't really focus on that. And frankly, I wouldn't even focus too much on making this really big case for why you're raising your rates, because then you run into thou doth protest too much. People get it. And some people are going to be annoyed and they're looking for a reason to leave, and that's fine. And I think what anybody in the entire industry will tell you is there's not really an example of someone not coming out ahead by making a rate change. There might be some emotional discomfort because people leave and you feel threatened and sad about that. But in practice, if it's a reasonable rate change, you're only going to lose people in proportion to how much you increase the rates. So invariably, you tend to come out ahead on revenue, even if you're slightly down on members. And sometimes not even that. Sometimes it's all net. So that's, I think, how we think about this. And I think the only difference for, again, this communication is you would just reference how it's going to be easier to schedule things in weeks and not get billed every month and be confused and annoyed when you don't have enough sessions.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Aside from like a regular rate change, the only thing you would add when you're changing the billing cycle is an explanation of, we've been billing as if there's only 4 weeks in every single month. So you've been basically coming for 48 weeks of the month, but there's actually 52. So we want to correct that, which will result in a net increase of X% or a certain number of dollars per session. Plus, here are all the things that we benefit, ways that you benefit by us keeping our rates at a competitive place. And so, I think that's great. And then continue on from there. So you send out this communication. What else matters in this transition? I think I interrupted you before.
I think, maybe now is an okay time to discuss price and strategy. I'll also say briefly before I forget, I know I keep hammering this, but literally if you email mark@businessforunicorns.com, I can actually send you scripts. So I can send you a breakdown with a list of all the things to consider. And actually, you can literally copy paste it, plug in the name of your gym, plug in your changes, and then not have to write your own email.
Yep.
So I think as we move forward to considering pricing strategy, this becomes interesting too, because Keeler and I have a different perspective on this. So I guess maybe I'll give mine first, and then Keeler can give you a counter. So at Mark Fisher Fitness, we do weekly pricing that bills every 4 weeks. And we changed this. We used to both quote and bill biweekly. And we found that was very confusing for our members. And it also led to the challenge of not exactly understanding how to deal with rollover. So, and again, part of this might be because this is the only world we'd ever known, but we don't roll over sessions at Mark Fisher Fitness. It's a general best practice not to do that. So people knew if you were billed on, let's say, the first of the month, you have the rest of that month to use it. And then when you're billed again on the first of the next month, if you haven't used it, you've lost it, and then your credits will be refilled up. So doing that every 14 days also gave people less flexibility. So part of why we moved to billing every 4 weeks was because it was making things confusing for people to think about, okay, I have 4 sessions every 14 days, feels just a little weirder than you get 2 sessions per week, and every 28 days, you get billed. So I also like, from a consumer psychology perspective and in our sales conversation, we can now anchor, instead of the 14-day rate, which is of course more, we anchor on here's what the weekly rate is. And it's very simple because the asterisk is billed every 4 weeks. And so far with our members, that has seemed much less confusing. There's still some confusion, right? Because you still have individuals might still think of the month. And this means, for instance, if they're billed on the first of one month, then they might be billed on the 29th of the same month. And then the following ninth, maybe they're billed on the 27th based on how many days are in that month. So that could be a thing that is confusing because, again, people do kind of anchor to paying bills monthly, and 4 weeks is pretty close to it. But overall, this, I think, for us has allowed us to have our cake and eat it too. And we haven't really had much in the way of confusion. We've certainly had way less in the biweekly. We get to quote the lower weekly rate. And another thing about this, which admittedly is a small thing, is you are able to, you're not showing up on their credit card every week or every 2 weeks. So you're spreading it out a little bit more. They're seeing less bills from you. And that also means if you have to chase down credit cards, you have less opportunities you need to chase the credit card down. You're also paying, admittedly this is nominal, but you're paying less on a per transaction fee because you're not billing every 4 weeks. Now, I think there's a case to be made for any of these, and I would concede that one modest downside of the every 4 week is your cash flow is not supported the way if you're doing every 14 days or even every week is obviously in some ways the best cash flow, but now, of course, now they're seeing a weekly bill. It is not clear to me that consumers care about that so much. Oftentimes a concern about that people will posit as well. But if they're seeing us on the credit card every week, then they're going to be more likely to just feel like they're spending a lot of money here. Maybe, I don't know that that's true. It's possible. Yeah. I'm biasing my own experience as a consumer. I look at my credit cards every couple of weeks, but I don't think that would be such a big thing. I think I know how much I'm paying for things, so I don't probably care too much the way it's being billed. But yeah, I will just acknowledge for some people, it feels like a concern to them. So that's, for me, it is less about, oh, it's better to do it every 4 weeks because I don't want the death by 1,000 cuts of the weekly billing. For me, it's actually about, it's easier to have the flexibility because now there's clarity about what rollover is like. Because now instead of trying to get it done in 14 or God forbid, it's every 7 days they're losing the credit, they have 28 days now. So there is a little bit more flexibility. So if they go on vacation for a week and they've got, let's say, 2 times per week, which is 8 every 14 days, it's going to be a little bit easier for them to use that credit, and they're going to be a little less likely to be aggrieved and a little less demanding that they have to freeze their account.
Yeah, I think well said. I think it's a great summary. And I think overall, I just want to +1 all of it, right? That is a strategy most people should consider, is to frame up their billing as like, you get this many visits per week and it costs this much per week. And then the frequency of when you bill them, I think, is secondary. You know, at MFF, we do every 4 weeks. And the only other alternative I would share is that there's a lot of Unicorn Study members who started off doing every 4 weeks, and they had more confusion because it's so similar to a month that clients were so confused. They're like, oh, 4 weeks, like a month. No, it's not a month. It's every 4 weeks. And so some of them found that moving back to billing every 2 weeks was both beneficial for the confusion to not make it similar to a month. It was also beneficial to your other point, Fisher, which was cash flow, which is, it's so much better to have, you know, a little bit of money throughout the month to help you pay the bills. And for those folks who are doing profit first and doing allocations every 2 weeks, you can align, you know, your client cycle to that, and it's just kind of easier chunks of money. So there's slight benefits to both, right? It's not like there's a right or wrong options, but I think the core strategy of billing based on a weekly price and a weekly commitment of visits versus monthly. That is the core thing that really everyone on this that's listening should do. Whether you then bill weekly or bi-weekly or every 4 weeks, I think you can find pros and cons to all of them. And for MFF, every 4 weeks is working great and solved certain problems. And I think for other people, I've heard a different experience. So you got to figure that one out for yourself. But once you're billing on a weekly basis, switching to, once you're pricing on a weekly basis, switching the billing to every 2 weeks or 4 weeks is kind of not a big change.
Not a huge deal, yeah.
Yeah, not a huge deal. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we could probably keep talking, but I feel like we really laid out what this is. Yeah. The benefits of billing, of pricing weekly, the benefits of billing not monthly, but on some sort of weekly pulse. We talked about how to change from what you're doing to that, how you roll out the email, etc. I will say, I'll add one thing, that in terms of timeline, generally speaking, we like to give people a heads up about any rate change. Sure. Probably more than a month, probably, less than 5 months, right? So you can start to tease maybe, 3 or 4 months out. Hey, we're going to be making this change. And then you want to send maybe a reminder or two right before the change happens. So this is something you do have to plan for. You don't want to spring it on people starting next week. Everyone's going to be paying more. And that's true whether you're doing a regular rate change. That's also true for a correction. If you're doing a correction, like, 8% or more, you might want to give it even a little more time. We might start teasing that out maybe 5 or 6 months in advance, depending on how big a thing is. So I just want to stress that this is not something you decide to do tomorrow. That does require a little planning, a little advanced communication. But to Mark's earlier point, you don't want to over communicate it, make a huge deal out of it, especially if it's
not that big of
only
a deal.
A couple percentage points. Yeah. We all pay more for everything every year. People are used to it. We're now back in a high inflationary environment. So people are more and more used to things costing more, and we should be no exception. Yeah. Anything you want to share just to wrap up this conversation?
No, not on this. I would just remind our listeners, our viewers, to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and give us a rating on whatever platform you are checking this out on. And if you happen to be on Apple Podcast or watching this on our YouTube channel, if you look in the show notes or the description box, you will find other ways you can get more help with us. So if you don't feel comfortable figuring this out on your own, we are not technically currently enrolling for our Unicorn Society, but if you want to find out more about our coaching group, you can find the link below. Let's get you on the wait list, and that way you'd have priority consideration when we open up enrollment again in a few more months.
Amazing. Well said, my friend. All right, listeners, thanks for being here. Great conversation, Fisher, and I'll see you all in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.